Welcome into another Inside Carolina podcast. It's This Week in UNC Baseball. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. It's usually Scott Forbes in the middle. Scott Forbes is not with us today. We have a special guest, one that will make Grace extremely happy as we talk pitching with assistant head coach and pitching coach Bryant Gaines from the North Carolina 9-0 Tar Heels. Coach Gaines, how you doing?
Doing great. Excited to have another day and obviously excited about another game and big weekend ahead.
Absolutely. Carolina, of course, playing in the middle of the eight games in 9 days. The first thing people think about in college baseball or in baseball in general, if you're playing 8 games in 9 days, how's your pitching staff hold up? We talked a little bit off the air, but just for the folks watching or listening to this, that's a lot in college. I mean, at most you're playing 5 games in a week with a weekend series and a couple midweeks, and normally it's just 4. How have you guys managed this process so far, given the weather that's caused this long stretch?
Well, I think one of the things that's helped us a lot is we prepared a lot of guys in terms of their pitch count to be able to go significant innings. And early in the year, that's usually what you're most concerned about is what kind of length are you going to get from starters. And for us, fortunately, we had about 8 guys that we extended their pitch count. And that's allowed us to do one of 2 things. We could either start them and let them go for a little bit, or they could pitch on multiple days and just not throw quite as much. So even though it is a lot of games, we felt confident going into this stretch that if we managed it the right way, we could come out and win a bunch of games and also, keep everybody fresh and healthy.
So one of the big questions that we always talk about is how you decide. Obviously, Jason DeCaro is going to be one of the main guys. Aiden Houck showing his ability. You had Folger, you had Jake Knapp, and all those guys. But when you're coming into a season, when you've got 2 of your big guns coming back from injury after being repaired with Knapp and Boaz, you've got DeCaro, you've got Houck. What's the process in the preseason, I guess in the fall, to try to narrow down that potential weekend starters? Because you guys, at least as long as I've been paying attention, whoever started on Sunday, first game of the season's rarely there later in the season. So just what's that process like for folks that may not understand how detailed it is?
Yeah, well, we wanted to make sure that anybody that we felt like could potentially start a game for us, they started in preseason and fall scrimmages. We never wanted to throw any of those guys into a situation that, they hadn't been in at least before in an inter squad. And once we started to do that and we knew who had started games and who we felt pretty confident had started games, then it was just a matter of saying, okay, who's going to be better on back-to-back days, who has the ability to pitch on shorter rest. Some guys, they just pitch better out of the bullpen because they may not put as much pressure on themselves to actually start a game, So we had an idea of what we were going to do. We also had an idea based on experience, what we could do. And then it was just a matter of, okay, how are these guys going to fit into the mix that's going to make them most effective? Not just, hey, we're going to throw whoever we think are the best returning, pitchers out there at the beginning. So a lot of it was based on what we did in the preseason by throwing all those guys in a number of different roles and then just figuring out, okay, if it settles in like we think it can settle in, how does it maximize each of those guys in terms of their ability?
When you go about game planning for a weekend such as Stony Brook coming up, when it's still kind of early season and the roles aren't completely defined, how do you go about game planning for a weekend such as that?
That's a great question, Grace. A lot of it has to do with, we try to look at it in terms of our bullpen as one game at a time. So, a lot of that will be dictated based upon what we did the last 2 days. Who's going to be available on Friday. We're not really looking at Saturday and Sunday yet. It's all about, okay, how do we win the game Friday? So then it's a matter of, okay, if we know who's going to be available, which guys have the best matchup, how do they match up against the Stony Brook? And that's what we have to do a good job of, today is making sure that we know, okay, based on the guys that are available, who we feel like is going to match up against not just them as a team, but even specifically against individual hitters that they have that may be the better hitters in their lineup. And then usually once you do that, you got a pretty good idea. Once I sit down with Coach Forbes and we talk about, all the different scenarios that can play out in a game, that's when you usually make your best decisions as to who to go to in which situation.
During the season, I know you guys have the pitching lab. During the season, how much do you utilize the analytics that you get with that and help pitchers either change their pitch shapes or just be more effective on the mound?
I would say during the season, the lab is used more to check in with their delivery and their stuff to make sure it's where it needs to be. We use that a lot. For instance, before we started the season, they all threw a bullpen off of our Newt Force mound. And that was important because it gives us a baseline to go off of if a guy starts to struggle a little bit or he loses some velocity or his stuff starts to tick down a little bit, you can put him back on that mound and see if, number one, if there's a deficiency in his delivery. But then the other part of it is we'll make some changes during the season based on the information that we have from what we've seen from opposing hitters. So if guys are getting hit in different parts of the zone, if different pitches are getting hit, if I'm not calling the right pitches in the right sequences, we'll start to make those changes based on the information we can get, from all of that stuff, really on a week by week basis. So, we use it a great bit, but it's also one of those things where if it's not broken, we're not going to fix it. So we'll keep rolling with what we know.
We could talk for hours here, but you mentioned pitch sequence. One of the main things you hear in the stands is people fussing about why you would throw this pitch in that situation or why you put that pitcher in this situation, all that kind of stuff. So just talk to us about how scientific you guys get on your pitch sequences per batter, per team, per pitcher, but also how much of it is a feel thing and how much is hey, Aiden doesn't have his off speed today, but his fastball's throwing real well. We're going to have to change it up. How much goes into that when you're live in it versus the amount of preparation you do before the game?
Well, that's a great question, Tommy. But the thing that I always tell our guys is you always have to go off of what you see. And you always have to go back to whatever that pitcher's strength is. So, I'll give you an example. The other day, Cameron Seagraves is in the game, and it's a 3-1 count with the bases loaded. And I felt more confident throwing his slider for a called strike than I did his fastball. So we called 2 sliders and struck the guy out. And I'm sure if we would have thrown a ball there, it would have been like, golly, that's the craziest pitch decision I've ever heard of. But it's one of those things where if you're with them every day and you understand what they do well and what they don't do well, you're always going to call it based on what the guy on the mound's strength is. And we'll know what the hitter's weakness is. We'll know what pitches they struggle with. If they struggle against righties, lefties, where they struggle in the zone. I always try to figure out from an opposing lineup standpoint where each hitter wants the ball. And then when you're trying to decide on matchups and stuff, you try to put guys in those situations where they're going to maximize where they don't want the ball. And then hopefully that presents a good matchup for you.
How much is my guys got this, good luck?
That's about 95% of it. There's at the end of the day, you're going to always go to, if you got to make a pitch, you're going to go to that guy's best pitch. And,
right.
You never want to say that you got beat on their 3rd pitch or their 4th pitch because they're working on a changeup or they're working on a cutter. If you got to make a big pitch, you go to whatever their best pitch is because they've had so much success with it.
So hold on, Grace. I got to follow up. That was an easy one. So you talk about working on stuff. How difficult is it to find out what guys can do in game? Scott told us the other day, I asked him, what's the balance of playing guys and building depth and finding out what guys can do versus maybe a win or sacrificing a win? And he said he's never going to sacrifice a win to build anything like that. How does that work with pitching? Like we saw Shimoleski last night. That was his first outing. How do you decide we've got to get this guy in? We've got to get Boston Flannery in, but also we want to win.
Right.
And we can't risk that. Where's that line for a pitching coach?
Well, I think it really depends because, like, for instance, I really feel like Tom Chmielewski, he can be a force for us. But I also wanted to make sure that we put him in a situation where he has the best opportunity to have success. And I feel like that part of it's critical. I don't think as a player you often think, well, they're going to make sure they put me in so that I have the best opportunity for success. I knew that A&T was going to probably pinch hit a left-handed hitter off the bench. Tom's got two really good left-handed breaking balls, and I thought that would present a good matchup for him to get him off to a good start, and that's where, if the opportunity presents itself, you try to put in what you believe is going to be the best matchup if the game dictates you have the ability to do so, and that's where us tacking on, those few extra runs, it gives those guys another opportunity so that hopefully we can continue to build, a lot of that depth out of the bullpen.
In game, how do you make adjustments when, say, Jason doesn't necessarily have his off speed, or, for example, Ryan Lynch doesn't have the precise command of his fastball? It's in the middle of their outing. How do you make changes with the pitching sequencing, and also just to make sure that they're, throwing the pitches they should be throwing on the mound?
Well, one of the things that I always do is I know which spot in the zone they're most comfortable going to, and I also know which off-speed pitch they're most comfortable going to as well. And if they start to lose it a little bit, if the command starts to get a little bit scattered, oftentimes I'll go to the spot that I know that they're most comfortable throwing to, because I know their margin for error is much more substantial than, if it's to a spot, let's say it's a fastball in, but they have erratic command, I'm probably not going to call it in because the risk reward is substantially higher, so that's where just being around them every day in their bullpens and understanding what they do well and what they, struggle with. That's where I think it helps you make those split second decisions in a game. And it works out sometimes, but, at the end of the day, like I talked about earlier, it's a matter of just going to what you feel like their strength is.
All the tactical little idiosyncrasies of your pitchers, but how do you mentally prepare them for the spots they're going to enter on the mound, especially with Jason starting last year as a freshman in some really big spots, and you've brought in 3 freshmen in really big spots this season?
We talk about that a lot as a pitching staff, Grace. We do a lot of routine work. We video them between their pitches in inter squads, which is something that most all of them have never seen before. They only see video of what they do when they're throwing the pitch. But we had 2 scrimmages, each of them had 2 outings in the preseason where we put a camera on them and we clipped their video from the time right after they threw the previous pitch to when they were getting ready to deliver the next pitch, so that they could see what their body language looked like. And I feel like that's one of the things that helps them is, I tell them all the time, you got to act differently than you feel. Whether you're struggling or you're pitching really, really well, you have to be consistent in terms of your body language, and you have to prepare for what we believe are going to be the biggest moments in the game. It's easy to pitch when we're crushing somebody and you're throwing the ball exactly where you want to, but we want to be able to prepare our guys for, when it's a big situation, when the bases are loaded, when you have to go to an off-speed pitch in a 3-2 count, all those situations. So, I called a lot of pitches in the preseason that I'm sure a lot of them thought was crazy. I called some 3-0 off-speed pitches. I called some bases loaded off-speed pitches, only because I know that they're going to have to make those types of pitches in the season when it's going to matter the most. And because they've already done it to a certain degree, I feel like it gives them a lot of comfort in those situations.
Talking about preparation, I know that when the starters throwing before the game, you're throwing with them before Luke kind of steps in. Is there a specific reason you do that? Is it to calm them down? Is it to kind of just mentally check in?
It's 3 reasons. The first one is because I feel like I'm a really good catch play partner. Last year, I had 3 overthrows in the whole season. My goal is to always be perfect. And I always feel like, as a starting pitcher, if you're throwing with somebody and they're throwing the ball all over the place, you're going to get frustrated, and then you're not going to be as locked in as you need to be. So that's number one, and that's not a credit to myself. It's just something I take a lot of pride in. The second reason is I get a really good feel for what their body language is like, what their emotions like, and that'll give me a feel going into the game, like, okay, you know what, he's locked in today, or you know what, like he seems a little bit, I don't know, little antsy, little anxious. We may need to be ready to go a little bit earlier. And then the third reason is, quite honestly, I just like playing the game for just a little bit of time, because I never get to play the game anymore, So it's something I've always enjoyed doing. It's more for the first two reasons, not for the third one, but the third reason is important.
I think that you're spot on there. You don't know just watching, but when you're throwing with them, you certainly can feel it. Speaking of mentally and prepared and guys having it, not having it, and I don't want to talk on it to pick on him at all, but Ryan Lynch came in, his first outing there in the Bosch was great. Durham, he struggled. He struggled warming up in the pen. As a pitching coach, when you're seeing that happen in the pen, what's your mindset? This is a tight game. This is East Carolina. My guy is struggling out there in the pen. We're going to force him in there and make him get over it. And then he does end up getting a strikeout on a nasty pitch. What's going through your head when you're seeing all this play out there?
Well, my first thought was, I wish he could throw it to the catcher, because Jason threw a really good 1-0 curveball that was a called strike that would have changed that count. So that I was a little bit frustrated at first. But then after that, as long as he was warm and he was ready, it's like I told Coach Forbes, let's go to him, but we're going to protect him with somebody behind him. We had Maddie behind him, and the only reason we would have maybe changed that scenario is if we didn't have somebody else behind him. And that's where having those veterans like a Matty Mateus, that really helps, because I feel like it takes some of the pressure off of those kids in those situations, so that, if they don't work out of it or it doesn't go the way they want to, we can end up wiggling out of it. They can learn from it, and then hopefully they can be better the next time they're out.
Folks, while we talk about Carolina baseball, must talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Great sponsors of this podcast, great friends of Inside Carolina, and a great place for you to get all your Carolina swag. It's baseball season. We're talking baseball. Go to Johnny T-Shirt on East Franklin Street. Get all the swag you need. They've got the jerseys, the hats, T-shirts. If you want a journalism school shirt, you can go to Johnny T-Shirt. If you want something for tailgating, you can go to Johnny T-Shirt. If you want stickers, Christmas ornaments, anything you could possibly need Carolina related, Johnny T-Shirt's got you covered. And if you can't get the East Franklin Street, then get them online at JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Great friends, great Inside Carolina sponsor, and also a great way to get 10% off your order. If you go get the Inside Carolina Premium Board code, take it with you to Johnny T-Shirt or enter it in on JohnnyT-Shirt.com. It's 10% off your order. Also, another great sponsor is on the top of the screen. That way, I guess, Congruity. Email matt@congruityhr.com. Get your free assessment. Get your small business rolling with Matt and Darren and that crew at Congruity. They made themselves a national brand. They can make you a national brand. You start local, you go big. You expand your footprint. Congruity. matt@congruityhr.com. Tell them Inside Carolina sent you. That's also free. Now back to the show. We're talking with assistant head coach and pitching coach for North Carolina, Bryant Gaines. Coach Gaines, we talked about it a little bit briefly, but most of these guys come to Carolina or come to major college, they're starters in high school, and they throw a ton of innings as a starter. Well, clearly, everybody's an All-American. When you get to college, somebody's got to be in the pen. A guy like Folger Boaz, coming off an injury, you've put him in the pen. He's been better in the pen this year. He talked about the mental mindset of that. From a coaching standpoint, how do you figure out which guys are mentally tough enough to come out of the pen? Because I do think it's a big difference. I think it was Walker McDuffie that told us the other day that it's different having a couple hours to get ready versus 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. How do you as a staff determine over the course of the fall, the off season, whatever, okay, we need these guys out of the pen because they can handle it. No, this guy needs to start because I don't know if he can handle that action there. What's the process in narrowing that all down?
Well, Tommy, I would counter that with, I think it can be equally as hard to start because you got 6 days to sit on it and think about when you're going to pitch, And that's where, for us, I feel like a lot of these guys, as you said, they've all started out of high school. They're all comfortable doing that. And quite honestly, they all want to do that. but at the end of the day, some of them have no idea how much better they can be out of the bullpen, just having that short memory, being able to come to the ballpark every day, being excited to get out there and pitch, and it's like I told Folger yesterday, one of the great things about pitching out of the bullpen, but also one of the negative things about being out of the bullpen is you have to have a short memory. You have to, whether you pitched well, it's over. You have to be ready to do it again the next day. If you didn't pitch well, it's over. You have to be ready to do it again the next day. And I feel like a lot of times that can give those guys a lot of comfort, knowing that, okay, I'm going to be out here for a short amount of time. And then whether I get it done or I don't, I can still bounce back and be ready to go again the next day. I told Folger yesterday, I said, man, you didn't go quite as long as I feel like you probably wanted to go. But the great thing about it is that's going to make you available to go out there and do it against Stony Brook on Friday. So I think there's some comfort in that.
Is there a big difference when, say, you're calling Jason's on the mound, you're calling his pitches, and you guys kind of know, hey, we want him to go 5 innings, as compared to calling Walker on the mound in a relief spot or Folger in a relief spot?
I think it really depends on the situation that they're in at that given moment. Obviously as a starter, you want to get length out of them. So we're going to challenge teams right out of the gate, and we're going to try not to empty the kitchen sink in terms of all their pitches early, because we don't want that pitch count to get up. But the situation will change that. If it's bases loaded in the first inning and we got to go to 3 different off-speed pitches to get a guy out to prevent a run from scoring, we're going to do that. So in some ways, Grace, yes, it does. But the situation that you're in the game is always going to take precedent over, getting length out of a starter. The guys that throw at the front end of the game, though, you're just trusting them that they're going to get your team off to a great start and then hopefully create some length as they get going.
We've seen you make a few mound meetings this season. What are you kind of saying to the guys when you go out there, especially because it seems that you're going out in those real big pressure spots right before those big pitches?
Yeah, I tell the guys all the time, when I come out there, I'm basically calling timeout, because I'm usually not out there if it's a great situation, right? It's usually not a good one. And when I get out there, most of what I'm doing is I'm trying to make sure, number one, they understand the situation they're in. And then number two, understand exactly what they're going to do in order to attack the next hitter. And then number three, especially some of these younger guys, it may just be with how slowly I'm talking or how calm I'm trying to talk, just to try to settle them down a little bit, And I think as a pitching coach, you get a feel for what each guy needs. Some of them you need to get on them a little bit. Some of them you need to slow them down a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I walk to the mound when I get out there, is I'm trying to make sure I make the right decision as to which version of Bryant Gaines they're going to get when I get out there.
Sounds like there's some good cop, bad cop going on, and you might be one or the other given the situation.
I don't think I'm bad cop too often, but sometimes.
How long does it take you to figure out what a particular player needs? Because some guys, like you said, some guys you can just blow out. Mm-hmm. And they're cool with it. Other guys, you blow somebody out and you've lost them. How long does it take you to figure that out?
You usually figure that out fairly quickly. I would say, and that's where just being around them and understanding them, that's where you get a good feel for exactly what they need, because they're all different. You got to coach them all different, and I just want them to understand, like when I get out there and I'm talking to you, it's not because I want to be out there and I want to just have a conversation with you. I'm not the type of pitching coach where I'm going to use my 3 trips every single game. A good game for me is when you never see me. And that's at the end of the day, they know that if I'm coming out there, it's because, I think I have something very important or valuable to tell them.
So how often do you quote Nick Saban? Because Coach Forbes does all the time. Who's your go-to and how much do you draw on your past experience of being there and doing that as well?
Yeah, well, I got to answer that one delicately, Tommy. I try to steer away from the Nick Saban quotes simply because I know those guys are going to get some really good ones from Coach Forbes. So a lot of what I'll go tell those guys comes from, past experiences or players that I've played with, teammates that I've had, just simply trying to relate to them based on guys that have been in their exact same shoes. They get so much great information from Coach Forbes in regards to all of that. I'm trying to make sure that I give them stuff that they feel like they can really apply on a day-to-day basis. And like I said, a lot of that comes from either my experience as a player or coach, or a lot of it will come from former teammates and stuff I've had that watch us play and want to relay a message to them.
Say it's the off season and you want to either develop a new pitch with a pitcher or tinker with one. How do you go about that? How much do you rely on analytics, and how much of it is just a lot of pitch nerdum that happens?
Yeah, a lot of that comes in with the analytics. We'll look at the way we'll typically do it is in the fall, we'll have about 2 weeks where we're trying to learn as much as we can about our guys, especially our new guys. Our returners, it's a little bit easier because we'll have an idea of what we need to do. If it is work on a new pitch, like a cutter with an Aiden Houck, or improving fastball efficiency with Kyle Percival, or, we'll have an idea with our returners. But in the fall, that's where we're really going to take that next step of, number one, learning exactly what they do well, making sure they understand that. And then number two, understanding, okay, what you don't do well and how are we going to improve upon that? And that's what, to me, the fall is a lot of fun in that regard, just because you get a chance to learn a whole lot more about them. You get a chance to try things and fail. We're going to try different pitches in the fall, and some are going to work. Some of them aren't going to work. We're going to pitch into different spots in the strike zone in the fall. Some are going to work. Some aren't going to work. So that way when we get to the season, we're a much more polished version of what we were, before we started the year. So that part of it's extremely fun. And we use all of that stuff a substantial amount in the fall. Mostly in the season, we'll use it to validate some things that we know, or if we do need to make some small changes, we will.
How do you evaluate outings, or say for Aiden's cutter, at what point do you figure out, hey, this can be a viable pitch that we can use in a game?
A lot of it will be based on what we see against our hitters. So, from an analytics standpoint, a pitch may be exceptionally good in terms of what the pitch shape is, all that kind of stuff. However, if you can't get to that pitch, if the counts don't present the right opportunities to throw that pitch, well, then we know, okay, it's probably not going to be useful. If we're developing a new pitch, the thing that we try to do a lot of in the fall and even some of the preseason is throw it in counts where there's not much pressure. So for instance, if it's Aiden Houck's cutter, we tried to throw that pitch in 0-2 or 1-2 counts away from right-handed hitters, so that if he did miss with it, it wasn't like it was the end of the world. We're not going to throw it 3-2, second and third against, Tyson Bass, unless we're trying to bury it or throw it off the plate. So, we'll try to pick our spots when we use it, and then we'll go off of the success or lack of success based on what we've seen based on our hitters.
How stressful is it calling pitches? And is it easier for certain guys out there for you to call for certain guys, or is it equally stressful across the board?
It's in the moment, I would say it can be at times, it can be somewhat stressful, but you're having to make a decision so fast. That's where I feel like you have to just lean on your preparation and really know what your pitcher's strength is. I would feel terrible if I went into a game and I didn't know much about who was on the mound, or I didn't understand what exactly we were trying to do to the hitter. But I'll say this, like if we give up a homer, I feel like I gave it up. But if we strike a guy out, I feel like the guy on the mound struck him out. So it's a delicate balance there, because, every pitch they make, especially if it doesn't go well, I feel like I threw it. So I always want to try to be better and think, okay, where can I go back? What can I change? And there's usually there's usually 2 to 5 pitches a game where I go back and I'm like, man, I should have probably gone to this, or I should have probably gone to that, but at the end of the day, you make the best decision with the information you got and know the strength of the guy, and that's what you end up going with.
We were talking in the box the other day. It may have been down in Greenville. Curious as to, and this is just a simple question, but curious balls and strikes. When you see a guy that's thrown 100 pitches and he's thrown 60 strikes and 40 balls, what percentages are you looking for from your guys? Obviously, it's situation based, but I hear a lot of people. One thing I used to hate when I was involved in baseball was hearing somebody say, good miss, good miss. And I'm like, that's not a good miss. That's a wasted pitch. Your thoughts on that sort of discussion?
Well, first of all, we're looking for 70% strikes.
There you go.
That's usually that's what we're shooting for. We're looking for over 65% first pitch strikes. That's our goal. And if we miss, to me, usually if you miss to the side of the plate you're trying to throw to, you're not going to get beat. And that's one of the things I tell our guys a lot. When you get beat is when you're trying to go to one side of the plate and you miss to the other side of the plate, or you're trying to go up and you miss down, or you're trying to go down and you miss up. That's usually when you get hurt. But, we'll throw some pitches that would, quote, be thought of as misses, but we're using that pitch to set up the next pitch. We may elevate a fastball in order to set up a breaking ball in the dirt, or we may expand a fastball. Last night, Cam Padgett, I called a fastball. I called an expanded fastball in a 1-2 count because I thought the hitter was looking out over the plate, and he threw the pitch. He expanded the fastball, which can get a swing, but it didn't. It got called a ball, and then we went back to a fastball in, and he struck him out looking. So I think as long as the pitch is trying to set up the next pitch, or it's based on the plan you have for attacking that specific hitter, it's good. But there are certainly plenty of bad misses, and those are the ones that I referred to at the beginning, those ones that miss to the opposite side of the plate or the opposite part of the strike zone you're trying to go to.
Oh, how do you game plan for specific hitters? How much of it is preparation, and what do you look for in opposing hitters that'll match up well with your pitchers?
Well, the first thing I'm trying to figure out is where they want it. Like, I'm trying to figure out where they want the ball. And then I'm looking at, okay, how aggressive are they? Are they aggressive early in the count? Are they aggressive with guys on base? Are they really aggressive in specific counts? That's just a baseline of what you're trying to figure out. And then after you do all that, then it's a matter of, okay, do they do anything unusual? Do they swing at 3-0 pitches more often? Do they, they drag bunt? Do they push bunt? Do they struggle with on a part of the strike zone, for instance? And then after that, it's a matter of looking at it in terms of, okay, who would we need to go to in a perfect world to get that guy out? So who are we going to identify as their best hitter? And that's going to be the guy that, okay, if we got to make a big pitch, or we have to go to somebody in this spot in the biggest part of the game, who would we go to in a perfect world to be able to match up against them? And that's where knowing your pitching staff, knowing what they do well, you can have an idea going into the series of exactly how you're going to use them.
What do you look for, especially as you guys are trying to figure out roles in the pen? You don't have a ton of lefties. You have some big power righties like Maddie. What do you go about looking for when you're looking for a late inning reliever or a closer?
It's a great question. A lot of it to me is who can handle that moment, just from a pure between the ears standpoint, and you can tell when you're around them early in the season. We're not going to typically, if we're unsure, we'll throw them into different situations earlier in the year that may not be the ninth inning. And you can get an idea of exactly, okay, like the heart rate was low. He had a good look in his eye. And then once you put him in the game, does his stuff go up or does his stuff go down? And some of those guys, like, they might not have a great preseason, but then you put another uniform in the box and everything gets amplified. We've got a few guys that are like that. They're just, and it's something they need to be better at, but they're just not as good when we're scrimmaging each other. But then you put fill in the blank in there and everything just gets a little bit better, and that's where early in the season when we're throwing a bunch of guys, you get a feel for, okay, who could end up doing it on the back end. And if they're all throwing a ton of strikes and they all have at least one quality off-speed pitch, then it's a matter of just who can handle that moment. And, hopefully as we progress, we'll have a couple of guys that can be able to do that.
How big a security blanket last year was having a guy like Dalton Pence that you knew you could
Oh,
put in whatever it was?
yeah. I mean, like that guy was, one of, if not the keys to our season, especially from a pitching standpoint, because, Dalton, he could have started. And the thing that I respect and love the most about Dalton Pence is, we brought him in here and told him, hey, man, if we're going to win a championship, we really believe we're going to need you out of our bullpen. And the only thing Dalton Pence said was, yes, sir. And I remind those guys of that because, like we talked about earlier, they all started. Every one of them, they've started. And to be able to have a guy like that with that kind of stuff that changed our season and gave us the ability to make that type of run, well, that's just ammunition for me to tell those guys, like, somebody's got to be able to do that, and I'll be forever indebted to Dalton Pence. There's no question about it.
He was definitely a bulldog out there and has some amazing outings, especially late in the year in big-time games. Will we see a complete game for North Carolina in the future? Can you envision a situation where a guy like Jason or whoever can go a complete game? Obviously not in April. You don't want to push them that far, but it seems like that aspect of the college game has gone away a little bit, unless you're the West Virginia guy that's going to throw 180 pitches.
Yeah. I would love to. And I tell those guys a lot. Like, a matter of fact, I told DeCaro, Houck, and Knapp the other day, I said, at what point are you guys going to tell those bullpen guys to take the night off getting around with them, But I think that's certainly a goal that those guys have and should have. A lot has to go right for that to happen. It's got to be the type of game that's pretty much back and forth. If they're rolling, but then we score 7 runs in an inning and the team makes 8 pitching changes, a lot of times your hands are tied because they sit for a really long time. So I think certainly there's potential for that to happen. And, if it works out, I would be the most ecstatic more than anybody if it did.
How long is too long to sit for a pitcher period? Because we do see some of those long innings. You get umpire reviews, you get all that. What's sort of your borderline or your baseline if he's going to sit 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes? Is there a time frame, or does it depend on who it is?
I think there's a few factors in it. The first is where they're at in their outing. If they're coming out of the bullpen, how much they had thrown the day before or one day prior to that. And then what type of innings have they had? Have they had like high stress, high pitch innings where they're having to make a bunch of pitches with runners in scoring position? But for me, if the other team makes a pitching change, usually my radar's up. And then if we score a few runs or we've walked a bunch of times, I'm aware of it. And then it's just a matter of talking to them, seeing how they feel, making sure they're doing their, between inning routines to stay warm. And I think you got to really just kind of go based on feel. But a lot of it, most of the time, if it's been too long of a sit, it'll be pretty obvious. It won't be something that we have to really do much discussing on.
When you're calling pitches or you're making those big decisions, who to bring out, when to bring them out, how much is it based on all of the previous variables that you've told us about, and how much of it is just kind of based on feel and gut feeling?
Well, I feel like you make your best decisions when you feel like you're really prepared for that situation. And for us, we try to think about, the easy situations are when everything's going right. The hard ones are, you got to think, as a coach, you got to think worst case scenario, who would we go to in this situation? And that's where, if you have an idea of who the best matchups are, who's available, where you're at in the game, and you have an idea of, okay, is this the time when we're going to win or lose the game? And that may not just be the 9th inning. That can be the 5th inning. That can be the 7th inning. It can be the 3rd inning. I mean, the past 2 games, we've given up 4 spots in the 3rd inning. Like, we got to be better in the 3rd inning. So I think that we'll feel confident with whatever decision we make as a staff, simply because we will have prepared for that exact situation. May not be the exact hitter, but we will have prepared for what's going to happen if we get into this type of situation.
If you could call a game for one major league pitcher, who would it be?
I have never thought of that one. I would probably Max Fried. Yeah, I just love watching that guy pitch. Him or Spencer Schwellenbach. One of those two.
Interesting. You call Nolan Ryan just throw fastballs all game.
Yeah, it's easy, right, Tommy?
Just keep it simple. What's the craziest thing that's ever happened out on the mound on the visit? We always try to ask a fun one, and see if guys will spill the details. But I know there was a couple times last year y'all went and got Dalton. Dalton wasn't happy.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a while. What's been the craziest moment, or the weirdest moment, or the funniest moment on the mound for you?
Well, I'll tell you one of the craziest, and I wasn't actually on the mound. I was actually with Coach Jackson at Liberty. And he did what Coach Forbes does. He made the changes. I did the visits. And we had discussed, we had our Friday starter out there. We had discussed, like, hey, we're making the change. The guy in the bullpen was ready. And so he goes out there to take him out of the game. I'd already written the next guy's name on my card. I was preparing for the next hitter with the next pitcher. He goes out there, they talk. I'm wondering why it's taking so long. They talk, and he turns around and comes back in the dugout. And I asked him, I said, why aren't we going to, I can't remember who the next guy was, but why aren't we going to so-and-so here? He said, he told me that he promised me he would get this guy out in 3 pitches. And I said, the guy was done. Like, he was out of gas. It was like 7th or the 8th inning. And sure enough, he threw 1 strike, 2 strikes, struck the guy out on the 3rd pitch, came to the dugout and pointed at me and him and said, "I told you so." And it was exciting, to say the least.
It's kind of like the Maddox story, where he says, no, I'm good. I'm going to get him to foul out to third base here. And
right.
Sure enough, he does it. How is last question for you, and I know we've kept you longer than we expected to, but appreciate your time. It's always fun to dig into the details. But how much is the pitch comm and all that kind of stuff and all the technology changed the game?
So much.
For the better?
For our players, yes. Like, I think it makes it easier on them. And that's always what comes first is, how can we most benefit our players? But I also felt like before you had that, and when you had sign systems and you didn't have TrackMan zones, there was a lot more gamesmanship that went into pitching, because there was just a lot more thinking involved when you were on the mound. Simply because, you didn't just hear the pitch and throw the pitch. And that's not to say that our guys don't do any thinking when they're out there, because they do. But, with how the pitch gets in and how quickly information is transferred, it's just so much different than it was, even 5 or 6 years ago, before we had that technology. And since I've been a pitching coach, we've gone from wrist cards on the glove to catcher wrist cards to wrist cards on the glove to sign systems from the catcher to wristbands that show the sign to now audio signs like they do in the big league. So I've run the gambit of all of those different things.
Are they hearing your voice in their ear or in their, is it
no.
your voice or is it a robot voice?
Okay. So last year it was my voice, and it's really odd to hear yourself talk to yourself for 150 pitches in a game. Like, it's just, I can't explain it. It's just a little bit strange. So this year I got to thinking about, I was like, how can we make this cooler and it not just be me talking to myself? So we got Roy Williams to record it. So every pitch that is thrown, Roy Williams is saying the pitch and he's saying the location. So I thought
that's
that was
awesome.
Yeah.
He's like, throw a daggum fastball outside.
He asked me
You
if
know,
he could put some stuff on there. I said, Coach, there's some stuff I can't let you put on there.
that is pretty awesome. Grace, you got anything left for Coach Gaines?
No, this has been so enjoyable.
Yeah, we appreciate you joining. I know you guys are busy. For folks that don't understand it, how many hours in the week does a pitching coach and assistant head coach put in to what goes on that we see between the lines for 3-4 hours a night?
Oh man, it's a lot, but if you love what you're doing and you want those kids on the mound to succeed like as much as we all do, it all ends up being worth it. So, we're just proud of the fact that they listen to what we have to say and they're trying to use that to their advantage, and hopefully that'll continue to be the case.
Indeed, that is assistant head coach and pitching coach Bryant Gaines of North Carolina Tar Heels, the 9-0 North Carolina Tar Heels. You can see the stats. So when you look at these stats running across, 3.33 ERA, 1.28 WHIP as a staff, are you liking those thus far this season, or you think there's a lot more room for improvement?
I think you know the answer to that one. There's so many areas that I mentioned one of them a second ago. We got to prevent the big inning. We may throw a bunch of zeros, but it's one of the things that we as a staff we got to get better at, and it's only going to get harder. So hopefully we can continue to improve on it each day.
Indeed, we appreciate your time, Coach. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys. Thanks for all y'all do.